Okay, good morning everybody. Perhaps I didn't need a loudspeaker, it's not very full today. We have a number of apologies. It's still holiday times, but we felt we needed to have this meeting. Decisions that we need to make and sign off. So welcome everybody and thank you for taking the time. We've got a record of apologies for absence. Can I draw your attention to a declaration of interest? Don't think we need to exclude the press, the public not here. So can we agree the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of July? Anybody that was here? Okay, thank you. And then item 5, the evidence report.
So Tom is going to
Tom,
talk us
yeah.
through this.
Do I need to press the button on here?
Yeah.
And then I'll just share my screen. So good morning everybody. I'm Thomas Newton. I'm the Economic Analysis Team Leader at the Combine Authority, and I'm here to just give a quick overview of the evidence and the key sort of indicators relevant to this committee that sort of come out of the State of the Region report. So the State of the Region report is an annual report that we publish every year, and this year's version is due to come out sort of towards the end of this month. And alongside the report, it's got around 40 indicators in it. There's going to be a full equality, diversity and inclusion report that sits alongside it, and that builds on the Women and Girls report that we published last year. So of those 40 indicators within the report, there are 9 that are sort of particularly relevant to the Place Committee, so I'm just here to talk you through those today. So on the screen, hopefully. Sorry, yeah, there we go. I'll just talk you through a few of the key charts. So this one shows the healthy life expectancy at birth across West Yorkshire's local authorities, and they're all sort of below the national average, which is obviously not ideal. Men in West Yorkshire on average can expect to live for 2.5 fewer years healthily than the England average, and women around sort of 1.5 years less than the England average. Now, I guess two kind of interesting points within this chart really is within Wakefield and Kirklees, where men have higher health life expectancies than women, and that goes against the grain sort of at the West Yorkshire level and at the national level. Moving on to sorry, of course, yeah.
On where it says healthy life expectancy.
Yes.
So there's a bloke in Wakefield when I get to when I passed 58.04 years.
Yeah.
What happens then?
So you tend to run into significantly more health issues, and the quality of life starts to deteriorate.
So do we have the ability then to put on life expectancy as well? Obviously,
We could share full life expectancy as well, yeah, if that's helpful. Yeah, we can start doing that in future. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, moving on to the net additional dwellings, it won't be much of a surprise that the 2020 to 2021 period saw the lowest annual level of dwellings since 2014-15, and that's largely because of the pandemic and supply chain issues that we've seen since then. Half of homes that were built in West Yorkshire during that period were built in Leeds, and we'd expect that following the pandemic and as supply chain issues start to get better and get back to pre-pandemic levels, the building of new dwellings will sort of get back to around 10,000, 11,000, which is where it has been sort of historically before the pandemic. In terms of housing affordability, West Yorkshire remains considerably more affordable than the rest of England. So it tends to be around 6 times average earnings, the average house price in West Yorkshire, and at the England level that's actually 9 times average earnings. So while housing affordability has got slightly worse, as you can see in this chart with the right hand bar being larger, it's not got worse by as much as it has in the rest of England. On the other hand, unfortunately, median rent for two-bedroom dwellings are actually higher in Leeds than they are in England for the average, and that's by about £15 per month. That tends to be because of a tighter sort of level of supply of dwellings in Leeds, with it being a sort of metropolitan city. But it's important to note that the bars on this chart, if you like, show upper and lower quartiles. So that the top bar is the 75th percentile. So you've obviously got more above that, but the range, if you like, between the interquartiles is much higher across England than it is within West Yorkshire. So it's a tighter band in prices within West Yorkshire. In terms of internet connectivity, gigabit capable internet connection is better in West Yorkshire than it is in the UK as an average. So this shows the level of full fibre connectivity, which requires a dedicated line, and that's sort of the things that you're seeing rolled out by companies like City Fibre around, and they're sort of rolling out to houses pretty quickly around West Yorkshire.
Except if you live in Calderdale, and I have to say that to give Jane that.
Yeah, if you live in Calderdale. It's a similar story as well in terms of the take-up of superfast broadband. Superfast is 30 megabytes or above, and that can be delivered through your standard phone line, and again West Yorkshire as well compared to the UK average, again with the exception of Calderdale and perhaps Wakefield as well. 4G coverage is pretty good and also very consistent across West Yorkshire, slightly above the England average in most places. But yeah, I think the key thing to take away from this is the consistency across West Yorkshire, which is higher than a lot of the other connectivity metrics. So now on to some, I guess, perhaps more topical and less good news. Across West Yorkshire and all of the local authorities within, we have below average energy efficiency, and so that obviously means that households and other buildings require more energy to heat and light than the England average. That's obviously a particular problem with the cost of living crisis. Recent analysis from the Centre for Cities shows that Bradford has the third highest energy costs in England. And that's due to things like the standing charge and lower energy efficiency combined together. So if we take a look at the energy price forecast, so it's worth mentioning here actually before I get into this that the government's fuel poverty statistics operate on a 2-year lag. So the data that was published a couple of months ago relates to 2020. So it doesn't capture any of the current sort of ongoing issues that we have. So we've pulled together sort of like a combination of a few charts, and this one shows the energy price cap forecast from Cornwall Insight. Now what it shows is that they were very accurate on the quarter four for 2022, which is the first bar within the red lines. But they actually underestimated the forecasts going into 2023, which are the two bars after that, which are now sort of looking beyond sort of £5,500 and £6,600 respectively, and that puts West Yorkshire in a more precarious position, based on the fact that we know that we need more energy to heat our homes than other places, and then again couple that with sort of the standing charges, which are among the highest in the UK and Yorkshire. It kind of means that just reducing energy consumption doesn't really cut it in terms of how we sort of get around the energy price rises. It's not as simple as just using less. Now, key exclusions from the price cap are prepayment meters, so that they will pay more than the energy price cap, and that kind of shows how expensive it can be to be poor. There's 105,000 households in West Yorkshire that are on prepayment meters. There's also no price cap on alternative fuel sources, so things like oil, coal and LPG gas. So rural communities as well are sort of will bear the brunt of this more than the standard household. And then, of course, businesses. So a business that was paying £6,000 in February 2021, obviously there's no price cap for businesses, so they're facing bills of up to £28,000, which is an enormous rise. Makes you wonder how they're sort of going to stomach that. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I want to interject that. I mean, those charts are quite stark, really, aren't they? So my question is there anything that this committee or widely can do, or should be doing? You know, we have had a lot from central government, and there is a slow motion car crash here happening, isn't there, here, in terms of not just homes, that you mentioned people prepaid for meters, but the businesses. So I know we've got lots of good projects to talk about, but of course costs continue to rise as they are doing, driven by energy. It's going to be challenging to deliver those. I think we've got to, I just want to raise it, raise it up the agenda. I mean, I know it's on everybody's sort of minds, but is it, is there some alarm bells ringing in the mayor's office kind of thing about it?
I think there is. I think there is of management. We don't just want to, however good the statistics are, we don't just want to note them and move on. We need to be dealing with a really serious issue. That's what we can do. Melanie, do you want to come?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have got a cost of living report that is coming to the Combined Authority meeting next week. So yes, we are looking at ways where we could intervene or we could help.
These graphs show, I think, really well that the two people who are wanting to be Prime Minister going forward, one of them at least is talking about cutting VAT. Well, if you look at these charts, the little blue tips, it's pitiful. It's well, exactly. So it's absolutely a drop in the ocean. So that's a valid point that needs noting in anything going forward.
I think we'll see what comes out. The Combined Authority is next week, and we'll see what comes out of that. But there's no doubt we're in a serious situation. Whatever we can do here at Regeneration and through Tracy's office, we need to be doing things. Each local authority, they're doing their own thing as well. But these all come together and see what comes out of the Combined Authority. But I do think these committee members here and on this committee will need to know what the follow-up is. So, we don't want to just wait till November for the next meeting. We need to know what we're doing and what realistically we can do. It's all really well. We've had a readers' meeting this morning talking about bidding for Eurovision and coming into hoping Leeds gets it. But, people are talking about the livelihoods of the business. It's okay having some grand ideas coming in, but it's the bread and butter stuff that we need to be dealing with, and that's what's worrying me at the moment. Yes, Steve.
Hi. Yeah, I think there's a bit of an eye of a storm coming as well, because there's on OneDrive that the service sector is pushing towards more people working from home, and that's fine at the moment because the heating's off. But I think as we move forward, there's going to be this sort of pull where the bill for keeping the lights on has got to be borne by somebody, and businesses are probably more than happy to have people working from home and cutting the bills by whatever percentage a month. But yet residents, now they're seeing the benefits of working from home, but suddenly when they then see the heating on, and I think we're all in that situation, we can all feel it. That when the heating goes back on, and you're going to start seeing some of these figures, you're going to be wanting to get back into the car, back onto the trains, onto the buses, perhaps, and then go back into work. In some areas where office life has changed, there isn't the space for them within those offices. So I think as well as there's something else happening over and above what we're seeing just on the fuel bills that we've seen, year in, year out, up and down fluctuations. I think there is something really going to happen if we're not careful.
Yeah, I think you're right, and people are struggling. Business, on one hand, there's the business, as you say, on the other hand, people who can't afford to turn the heating on. What we're looking at in Wakefield is having warm rooms across the district where people can come in and get warm during the day and in the evening, and perhaps put a television in there so that people can do that. But isn't it terrible that in this day and age that this is what's going to happen because of what's happening globally, really? So there is a lot to think about, but there is a terrible crisis coming if somebody doesn't rip it soon. I just think that people will be struggling, businesses will close, people will become ill because they can't feed themselves or they can't put the heating on. I just think we're in a terrible crisis.
I was going to say, they're all very valid points, and this is a regulated market, so even if it was a case of putting out more solar panels or something like that, it's not it really can't sort of generate our own energy. But I do think that there is another side to this, if I can find a silver lining, and that is that focus on energy efficiency has now risen to the agenda, and I think that there's a lot of complacency around climate change, and I think there's a lot of complacency around sort of consumption of energy. And I think that the push and drive towards renewables is something that I'm actually involved in, and I think it's really tangible, the shift that's happening in that space. And I just wonder, whether there are more things that we can do on the green economy side of things that take advantage of essentially this crisis. We use this crisis to really try and promote and push long-term structural changes that can really position us, might be a painful transition, but position us for the back of this, rather than maybe just lamenting on.
Thanks. Yeah, really great point around efficiency and trying to move us towards that decarbonisation approach. And colleagues may be aware that we have had a programme running called Rebiz, which has been supporting businesses in their ability to become more efficient through both advice and small grant programme. That's European money, it's coming to an end, but the Business Economy and Innovation Committee are looking at what we could do with our own local money to hopefully actually not be as constrained as the European money is, and develop a programme which would come off the back of that, completely recognising the situation we're in. We're seeing what we could do to try and accelerate some of that, but obviously we have only so many levers to pull, which we are trying to do. So I think you're right about that more general kind of messaging and campaigning that we can do. And if I may just flag one more thing, so I think, Stephen, you mentioned about public transport. So just to mention that today the Mayor's launching the ability to move to £2 bus fares. So if people are travelling, then that is something that we are trying to do to try and enable people to travel more affordably. But there are two examples, but you're right. I mean, I think the general message from the committee is what more can we do, and that's certainly, I think, what the Combined Authority will want to talk about next week.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay having cheaper fares, but in some areas, particularly in our district, there aren't the buses there. People in rural areas can't get to the jobs. So yes, it's great that we're having cheaper fares in some areas, but in other areas there aren't any buses. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Just a couple of slides left from me then, just still on, on this topic. So one of the reasons that this is so pertinent within West Yorkshire is this slide here, which shows the levels of deprivation using the indices of multiple deprivation breakdowns provided by the ONS. So the chart on this slide shows the deciles. Obviously in England you've got 10% in each one. But in West Yorkshire it's a pretty different picture. So you've got 18% of West Yorkshire residents live in the 10% most deprived neighbourhoods. and that's obviously a big problem anyway. But when you've got the sort of the current cost of living issues and those sorts of things, you need to start looking at the next percentiles as well. So when you look at the people who live in the lowest 20%, the 20% most deprived neighbourhoods, that's actually almost a third of West Yorkshire residents, and that's really
Sorry, just a quick question on that. I just wondered if you have the direction of travel of that as well, what the change is.
I don't have it with me. We can get it.
Yeah,
for you,
yeah, no, absolutely.
But that's really important because the analysis from the Bank of England recently shows that in that lowest decile, that the poorest 10%, if you like, are currently spending over 90% of their gross income on essential items. So basically, they've got virtually no money left after they've bought paid for the bills and bought food. And with prices of energy rising by 80%, you'd imagine that's going to impact heavily on the second and third income groups there as well, who were already spending around 60% of their income on those goods. So yeah, it's just to really press on that point that people in West Yorkshire are really going to sort of feel this more than the average across England. So yeah, that's sort of all of the indicators that I have to present today. I guess just a couple of words on the key implications. In terms of the climate emergency, as we mentioned, the energy performance certificates and those sorts of things, it brings out a really sort of important issue of how sort of West Yorkshire performs poorly on a national scale. With inclusive growth, obviously, we've got inflation running at 10%. We're forecast to sort of go above 13% into the new calendar year, and that has a really big effect on variable housing costs. So people who aren't on fixed rate mortgages and certain people who are renting are going to sort of feel that pretty heavily. Obviously, as well, wholesale gas prices rising enormously, and that's what's driving the price increases. And then just to reiterate again on the EDI, a full sort of EDI report will accompany the State of the Region report towards the end of this month, builds on the Women and Girls report from last year. And while the analysis is still ongoing on that, so we can't really say too much at the minute, there are some really sort of clear gaps, like the gender pay gap, and that's in the cost of living crisis going to have a bigger impact on women than men. So yeah, that was all there today. Thank you.
Hi, I think, and I know we've touched on it before, but there's a really obvious thing here that if you forecast disposable or price rises against the deprivation, and then if you were to look at that and say what is the impact on public service, health service, everything else, you could probably do a very if you said what's the current sort of burden, and forgive the crudeness of the language, but what is the burden on West Yorkshire for the difference in that, and then project that onto it, that's got to be on somebody's radar as a crisis point, because it's just gonna be crippling, isn't it? The reality is in this is just from a landlord's point of view. And the previous slide we talked about rental costs and things, that you're going to start seeing all those bills not paid, household bills not being paid, rental bills not being paid, because there isn't the money to do it. There's just and even if they took credit, there is just no way to pay that back. So it's almost, do we forecast that? I think we need to do and see the implications of it, because it has to be faced with and reported back up. Almost a point back in centrally to government to say, look, this is what's happening in West Yorkshire. This is the impact of life expectancy, of all sorts of other dynamics. And I know that I'm not suggesting a very complicated model, but I don't think it would need it. Mm-hmm. I think you could just exponentially sort of take the figures and say this is going to be where we're going to be in 12 months if something doesn't happen to get this cost down in some form.
Yeah, absolutely. We've started commissioning some new data. from paycheck, looking at how income spend the money and what proportions go where and those sorts of things. So we're looking to sort of start rolling that out once we've got hold of the data. We do intend to sort of get those breakdowns and provide them to the committee in the future.
Do we have the ability to take some perhaps NHS data as well in terms of things that affect West Yorkshire specifically, picking up on what you were saying about the deprivation, how it affects waiting lists, how it affects the rest of it, because all of those have direct costs on our social care programmes if the NHS isn't performing. And how does it affect on things like number of beds that's available within West Yorkshire compared with the national numbers? Because it would be good to be able to say, look, this is West Yorkshire in a nutshell, that everybody that feeds in, things that we're not responsible for, but we might want to have a view on, that says, yeah, if we could increase the number of hospital beds in this specific sector, impacting on the lowest proportion of people in deprived areas, look how much money it would save us in the long run.
Yeah, thank you. I think as a place committee, I think that we have an opportunity to understand the strengths and weaknesses inherently within different parts of our neighbourhood, and we need to, I think, have a response that is appropriate to the situation on the ground. And I think we need to go into quite a lot more detail. So, you know, if I look at pretty much all of those places, there's patches which will be very affluent, which will be very successful and will be working really well, and there'll be the opposite. And even if we look at the index of multiple deprivation, you know, if we start breaking down the actual indices and saying, well, which are the elements that are actually failing? You know, it might be the health thing, or it might be access to housing, or you know, whatever it actually is. Because I think without understanding where the strengths and weaknesses are geospatially across the area, I think it becomes really difficult to actually pick out whose presence can we leverage to try and respond to people's challenges within a particular area. And you know, when we've mapped these things, you know, we find that, you know, in you know, when we touch on housing affordability, and in the one sense that it's great to have really affordable housing, but if that goes too far, it means it's not viable to build anything. And if I look at Bradford city centre, you know, we've mapped that, and last year, you know, the house prices, apartment prices were £42,000. Now, you can't build them for that. So we end up with lots of derelict buildings, we have lots of short-term developments, we have lots of slum landlords doing, you know, terrible things. So actually, sort of, you know, so it's on the one hand, it looks like a good thing, but actually, it's, you know, it's too much of a good thing is a bad thing, you know, and so I think that there's another layer that I think is really important, and I think if we're going to be able to have a formula that can somehow respond to the data that you're presenting, I think we need to be responsive to those strengths and weaknesses, and it's not a blanket situation across all of those areas. And I just think that formula is really important if we're going to have something that's scalable as a strategy across the region that can help in areas where there's a massive deficit and areas that are doing very well but may have other issues, and there's a more nuanced approach. So I just think that overview of it just needs to be done as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, a lot of that data comes through the IMD, covers loads of different sort of aspects of society, and that's something that we could provide in future if that would be helpful. Absolutely, yeah. I think on the NHS point, that should be data that we can get, and again in future we can provide that.
Thank you. I was just going to add, you know, clearly we can see in the charts and what we know of what's going on, the situation with the energy crisis. Time is absolutely of the essence here, isn't it? This is in the next couple of months. You know, we need to be making some quick movements to address this if we're going to say that, you know, we have a role to play here, which I think we do. So, you know, what are we going to do? Come on, Ben.
Well, no, I was just sort of going to get in really. I think I totally agree with Stephen's point. Really, I think all we can do is from this committee raise the sense of urgency in a very clear way back to WICA, but then beyond to central government, and I think that's where the numbers come into it, isn't it? Really, I don't think anybody's. Well, I don't know what's going on in central government, but I'm not sure people are fully appreciating what the impact will be. And so if you can model somehow through this data to say, well, we've got 30% of our population in the lowest 20% decile here, and do you realise once they can't pay the rent and they can't pay their electric bills and they can't buy food, then there's a cost to the NHS of X, there's a cost to the councils of Y through social care, that law and order, no one's mentioned that. And so, if you can put that into sort of pound notes terms, we talk about it's going to talk billions to subsidise these costs, but actually it could cost a heck of a lot more than that. And if we can get that data from WICA and Leeds City Region, and if we can encourage other city regions to do the same as well, that's got to be the messages that got to go back, isn't it? Because it will be the north of England, won't it, that gets hit the worst. If presumably, to make those percentages stack up, there must be people in the higher percentages somewhere else, i.e. down south.
I think it's flashing. I don't know. Oh, there we are. I think there's a start point to this, because if people will die as a result of this. And I think if we looked at those figures even broadly and see how that would compare to deaths on the roads, and how much we spend on safety schemes to reduce those accidents as far as deaths on the road, and you were to look at those two, forecasts, as there is detailed for accidents, and look at those and say, actually, as an authority, that we know that this is going to be far more life-threatening than the impact of what's happening on the roads. There's a point of when we talk about the actions and steps we need to take, there's obviously a focus point for everybody in here, isn't there? And I think that's why that information will be so crucial, so that those various parts of the local authorities can see where, in terms of saving life, where is that going to hit, and where should we be spending I don't know what the solution would be, but exactly your point. It's even the point of, healthcare, the spaces, all that, and it feels like we are culpable. We've seen this data now. We've seen behind the curtain. We know what's coming. There's no excuse for saying, well, we didn't know. It's not that there's a pandemic and this is March a couple of years ago. We know what's coming. So I think we're all sort of culpable to say what we're going to do.
Going to the combined authority, the feedback from this committee, can that be fed back to them and to the Mayor's office?
Yeah, it can. We will feed that back. The papers need to go out today, I think, for the combined authority meeting next week. But we can certainly feed that back in, and it can be part of the discussion next week.
I think it must be.
Yeah.
If we're to be meaningful of how we feel about things, it must go to the combined authority, even if it's as an urgent item. It must be discussed, and some solutions must come forward. And I know individual authorities are going to be doing what they can do, but we are supposed to be, mayoral authority. We are supposed to be working together, and we will be stronger if we're seen as West Yorkshire, rather than us all doing our own bits, which we all will. But we need to be moving forward as West Yorkshire, and I do want it to be raised at the combined authority. I think it's important.
Yeah. Thank you. I was just going to add, I think there's various of us around the table that could probably support the team in terms of pulling the data together and working on it. I know your platform is amazing for that kind of thing. So, we're passionate about it. So let's do something about it. Let's yeah.
yeah, we'll bring it
Yeah,
forward for next
fine.
next
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, I think we've had a good go of that.
Yeah.
Howard, thank you very much for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Chair.
I know it's depressed as well.
Thank you, Chair. So as Melanie's outlined, we've got 3 schemes today for Brownfield Housing Fund at outline business case. The report does reference for the programme a total budget of just under 67 million, but committee members may recall that we have had an additional allocation through government, which I'm pleased to confirm has now been come through formally through an updated memorandum of understanding. So the total fund is now 89 million, just shy of 89 million. The terms of that funding remain the same though, so homes to be delivered by March 2025. So that's foundations coming out of the ground. So the first scheme today is in Calderdale District. It is Cal Green. It's a scheme to develop 114 new high quality and energy efficient homes, a build to rent scheme on a site formerly owned by the council. It does form an element of Calderdale's strategic master plan for Halifax town centre and a very important part of the revitalisation of that centre and the regeneration of it as well. The development will install renewable technologies, photovoltaic panels, as well as mechanical ventilation heat recovery to deliver carbon reductions in the range of 30% and over above current building regulations, as well as a level of EV charging spaces and cycle storage. I will say that officers at Calderdale have worked very hard with the developer and our team here to get the BCR in the realms as defined by government, so above 1 to meet the criteria of the fund. So it's taken some while to get to this point, but very pleased that they've got there. So we have now reached that 1.1 and representing medium value for money. No recommendation for funding today per se, as it is at outline. The total scheme cost is expected to be in the region of 17 million, with a contribution from the combined authority of 2.1 million. The scheme is still subject to planning consent. So today the request is for approval of the outline business case at decision point 3.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions regarding it. I mean, I think in the past I've kind of spoken about how I think it's really important for us to try and use projects like this to kind of stimulate the market, and I think build to rent sector is a really powerful opportunity to kind of drive inward investment into places. And I guess I wanted to understand a little bit more about the financials of the scheme. So in other words, what's the actual gross development value of this scheme, which I understand what the build cost is, but it'd be important to understand if there's a big deficit there. I mean, just judging by the numbers, it seems like the costs of your calculations, it seems like £150,000 build cost per unit, and plus all the other costs associated with it means that there may be a cost of delivering these at £200,000 per unit, which would mean that if the market was to follow on with this, we have to kind of have an understanding of what that deficit gap is and maybe what we want to be driving forward towards in order to ensure that we can use these kinds of schemes to stimulate the market proposition for others to follow on. And I think that's where the big opportunity is in terms of sort of creating the context for the market. So there was something about sort of understanding that the viability aspect and the impact of the market, and I don't suppose you've got this information, but sort of what the rents are going to be, are they market rents, and what does it look like as a commercial proposition? Just to understand the scale of if it is a deficit, the scale of that deficit is, because that's really the
I don't have the actual details with me today, but as part of all of these schemes that we're doing with the private sector, we do request a development appraisal, and that's where we assess the gap, so that we have an independent set of consultants who go through that detail with the developer to look at the build costs. Obviously, it's very challenging times at the moment with costs and supply chain issues. And particularly given that this is an outline business case, we are flagging through assurance, constraints and risks around cost inflation moving forward. So we do hold that information and we do challenge it. But on a programme like this, it also comes back to the strict government criteria that we are struggling in some places to achieve, if I'm honest, which is why it's taken some time for this scheme to come forward, and we've had to do quite a lot of work with the developer to get just above that threshold of one, a BCR of one. So it's not going to be easy sailing for this one, but I can't share the actual specifics with you, but I will say that we do hold them and we review those as we progress through the assurance
I
process.
think the biggest thing is can we get a market situation where the private sector can follow on?
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of institutional money going into the build to rent. To what extent could this particular scheme be essentially an exemplar of the offer and the opportunity for that sector to drive its money into some of these places? So just exert the market and follow on that.
I think.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I mean, following on from Amir's comments, really, I think all three of the projects sound, really, really good projects, and in principle, and trying to go for low carbon homes is a good thing. I think what I was struggling was a little bit, and being new to the committee, was about the process, I suppose, and the devil's in the detail, and maybe I probably have to hold my hand up and say probably in my day job where we're writing business cases and doing due diligence on funding, we've got probably got a bit more fixated on perhaps some of the details and there's probably more work behind the scenes that we haven't seen in the papers here. But I had I've got various questions. I'll just sort of give you the headlines, and then if you wanted to have a discussion about them, or maybe it might be more appropriate outside the meeting, because as I say, I'm sure that the work's there behind the scenes, but I was slightly concerned about the decision pathway, I think it was, because it mentions about whether, you're looking for approval today, and then this committee wouldn't see them again, and the project, I think, would be signed off by the MD. So, it's a question of what movement is there between now and then is a concern to me. But, obviously it links into the questions, these further questions then. So that was sort of point one. Second point was really, it's difficult to comment without understanding the parties either, because of course, well, from a procedural point of view, just able to confirm any conflicts of interest. Don't think we have in this case, in any of these cases, but it's relevant, I think, because for instance, an RP might have a different profit margin or requirement to a private sector developer, and we're not clear in the papers as what profits allow for within those costs. So that's the second point about the parties. I suppose thirdly was about kind of the location of some of these projects. Again, we're sort of dealing with the abstract, and without, as a simple surveyor, I'll always like to have a plan and say, oh yeah, this is what we're buying, this is the scheme or whatever, so you know what it is you're getting. That's the third point. Fourthly was, I suppose, about costs again, and I think you mentioned there, Katie, that you've had WICA has somebody external looking at those costs, so it's not just the costs coming from the applicant, because again it wasn't clear where the cost had come from and what scrutiny that's been put on from your point of view to protect WICA, rather than just accepting the developer's cost plan or whatever.
And then aligned to that with the costs is there's land value transparency as well, because again there's reference to, I think, some of the sites being owned by the council and other sites being owned by the private sector and so on. But what's the, and given that they're brownfield and there's remediation costs probably involved, it can be a bit challenging, can't it, with the to arrive at a relevant land value because of those uncertain remediation costs. I get that, but just understanding that is difficult. And then I mentioned about the private sector and profit margins, planning risk as well. You mentioned about, I think in one of them, I think it's Cow Green, and no affordable housing, and I kind of wonder, well, how's is that, should we be challenging that more so that it may be more policy compliant, even if we have to distribute more money to get the affordable housing and get the zero carbon houses. That would be my preference than not delivering policy affordable housing, subject to having oversight on the land value. He mentions about the land value across subsidised affordable housing. I say, well, hang on, just reduce the land value and deliver the affordable housing might be one thing. So I was concerned about that. And then that was 7, 8 was about funding. Sorry, I only got these late last night, so it's a quick read through. Funding was really about, again, the balance of, so one of the projects, I think, is the Leeds Village, looking for 7 million of funding from us against 154 million. So my question was, well, where's the other 150 odd million quid coming from, and what's the security around that? How do we know that's coming along? And is the funding, I think the Brownfield Over Fund is, you're looking at its grant, I think, but again, it talks about investing this money. It's not explicit from the reports whether it's grant or a loan, and if it's grant, what's the clawback arrangements and anything like that around that. Yes, that was, I suppose, loan or grant was the final point. So I've thrown loads at you. I don't expect you to be able to answer all of that, but I suppose it's principles about what we've been asked to do here in terms of signing off, because personally I don't feel we've got enough to sign off that level of funding, and I'd be worried that the MD would be exposed if he's just asked to sign it off without the answers to some of those questions, I guess.
Yeah, if I could come in, thank you, Chair. When you asked the first question, I thought, yeah, I'll come in, and then as you've read them, there's quite a few things that we could comment on here. So I think just if we start with the approval route, we have a very rigorous appraisal process where we have an in-house team that does appraisal, but where we need external support, then we will get that in for specialist areas. And actually for brownfield housing, we've got some external support that will look at the commercial deal, if you like, of the projects as they come forward. We ask for a strategic outline case, which we've got at a programme level. So brownfield housing programme has got an approval for a strategic outline case. We then ask every individual scheme to submit an outline business case and then a full business case. And then once the full business case is approved, if there are any things that are outstanding, they then would come forward to confirm that they've been completed before they get an approval to proceed. So we've got a rigorous appraisal process, and we can share some of the details with you. I think particularly as you're new to the committee, we've done some training on this, but it was before you joined the committee. So I think we'll do a bit of catch up, and we'll provide some of that information for you, because we have got a sort of tried and tested route for getting these projects through. If there's enough information, people can go straight to an FBC. If it's ready to go to market, they don't need to do an OBC first. These three are coming here at OBC asking for an approval to continue the work for the FBC. So at OBC, we don't have all the answers to the questions. They're still working up the scheme, but it's in principle, do we agree that this is the right thing to do? And therefore we will work on the detail. The commercials are obviously commercially sensitive. When we get to full business case, we often have an exempt annex that will come here that will have more detail, but that is not in the public domain because it is commercially sensitive. But that will come forward if a scheme's coming forward at FBC. We usually say that a scheme business case needs to come at least once to committee, whether that's OBC or FBC. So usually if it's been at OBC, you're happy with the principles of it, then it would go through to delegation. We have an internal project appraisal team that considers every project in detail. So the business cases that are submitted, there could be 100 pages in the business case with all the details set out. What you see in the committee reports is a brief summary. So we do get the detail. We go through that in a lot of detail, and we're making sure that it's good use of public money. Once we've got the approval from the combined authority, which was at the programme stage, that then can be delegated to this committee. And usually if the committee's seen it once, we delegate that to the MD to deal with the final issues. But we do have overage clauses, we do have security for loans, we have all those sorts of clauses in the funding agreement with the sponsor. So we do have that as a matter of course. I just wanted to pick up on costs. These are indicative costs, and we are fully aware that it gives you an indication of the size and scale of the project, but when it comes forward at FBC, those costs may be different. So it just gives an indication of size and scale, and we've flagged that they are indicative. And just on the affordable homes, the Mayor has made a pledge to create, or to deliver 5,000 affordable or sustainable homes. That is something that the team is pushing as a priority. For some schemes, that just doesn't work, and where you've got a BCR that is very finely balanced, as soon as you put more affordable in and potentially increase the grant amount, your BCRs just drop below 1. So it's a really difficult balancing act because of the criteria that we have to meet from government. So as soon as you start putting more grant in, more public sector funding from any source, the BCRs just dropped. So the team have done a great job at getting it to the 1. And if affordable homes are not affordable, then it's not in there. But we rest assured we are trying to do that. I'm sure there's more detail that you have, Kate, being closer to this, but I just wanted to make those comments first, and then do you want to come in, Kate?
Okay, thank you, Melanie. That's a great summary. Just to pick up some of those points, as Melanie said, there is an extensive amount of due diligence that goes on these schemes. I cannot stress that enough. So a lot of the questions and comments that you've raised, Ben, we do deal with through certainly through the due diligence between OBC and FBC, through the funding agreements, through red book valuations, security. We do security on grant as well as loan. We do security against overage. I think some of our private sector partners say they're due diligence to death, really. But if I can reassure you of anything, because it's me who has to sign off the due diligence before it goes for clearance, there's an extensive amount of work and scrutiny that takes place. In terms of affordables for Cal Green, it's the council's view that at the moment that there is sufficient supply of affordable housing within that town centre perimeter, but they are likely to be asking for an off-site contribution, and through the officer appraisal of this, we have asked for that to be conditioned, and a timescale for delivery of that affordable housing within the Calderdale area. So it's not that we're saying there won't be any. We're saying, well, you've indicated there should be some. It won't be on site, but we want it delivering and confirming by the council it will be delivered. I think it's an interesting point around the level of information that comes to committee, and I know myself and Melanie and the development manager for the scheme have weighed up how much, how little, particularly it's commercially sensitive, so we'll perhaps take that back and reflect on that. In terms of levels of investment, or what type of investment, again, these are all 3 outline business case. So it's to a certain extent, it's still a question. We're expecting currently for all three, if I'm honest, for it to be grant currently, but things move and are very fluid. So as we continue through due diligence, and costs do go down in terms of the levels of grant that we offer, from the expression of interest coming in to where we get to, we come to committee, costs do go down in terms of ask, but for these three I would expect is most likely to be grant, but we call it investment because loan is our first approach, or different forms of investment. I think that in terms of land value, I've mentioned the red book valuation. I think that will cover that off. I think that covers most items, Chair. Look to you.
Okay. Stephen.
Hi, yeah, it wasn't a question on governance, and because I'm pretty confident all that is robust. I think the only thing that stood out for me, and I got these papers late, so I apologise, I've not gone through all the details, but there's just one observation, and that is I'm also a climate commissioner, so with a climate commissioner hat on, I know that there's a quote about the cow green being 30% above current building regulations, but I would just highlight that I think, and I'm not technical in terms of the environmental assessments, but I think there is a challenge at the moment about whether building regs goes far enough to meet the objectives of in order to get us to where we need to be. And I would just sort of highlight that although that might be in there and as part of the due diligence process it will tick that box, actually in reality does it get us to where we need to be as West Yorkshire, and should we be going over and above that in order to deliver on that? Now I know that these things are long time in train, so I'm not suggesting that gets re-looked at, but I think going forward there needs to be something where practically we say yes, it might be 30% above the building regs, but actually how does it deliver on the ambition that we need to get to where we need to be?
Ben, were you happy with the responses that you found?
Yes. I'm reassured and I'm not surprised that all that deep work's going on in the background. I think, I suppose, the question is more about the kind of level of information and whether it would be helpful to the committee if you wanted feedback that said, right, well, yeah, in principle we're happy, outline business case, yeah, fine, it's all looks good, but if I was the MD being asked to sign something up, I would want to know and then it might mean that you can add that to your list of due diligence for the next phase. You can satisfy yourselves that it's done. You might already have satisfied yourselves, but at least you're getting some relevant feedback. Because I wouldn't want to say, well, I mean, I know we're not voting members anyway of this committee, but I wouldn't want to kibosh something for the lack of information. I'd rather be able to say, well, yeah, in principle this is great, but I think it'd be useful to know if that and I could do that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it is as well, and I think because we have changed since we became the mayoral authority and these committees were set up, they have been bringing the private sector in, which we feel is really important that we do that. But I think all of you coming in here do see things differently and perhaps shake us up a bit, which is not a bad thing. I know Amir and I have had many discussions about this. We need to get these decisions through the door, but we need to get them right, and we need to have the correct information for you all to feel comfortable with. So I think we'll take that on board. Anybody else?
So just a general question. I understood that we had another £20 million that was coming into the grant for the housing fund. Has the call for projects and process has that gone through now? Where's that? So it's good to know.
Yeah, Chair. The call for projects has happened. We have included some of those projects now in our revised waves 1 and 2, which are the ones that we're prioritising. But we were waiting for formal confirmation that that funding was available and the targets that we were working to. We have now got that from government, so we will formally ask the Combined Authority to accept the funding, and we're working with a larger budget than we had before. So yes, it's working its way through, and we are working on the basis, well, we have been for a few months working on the basis that that money is coming, because it was a public announcement. We were just waiting for the letter with the confirmation.
Okay, so back to the scheme then for Cow Green. Are we comfortable to move into the next stage? Okay. Let's take us in.
Thank you, Chair. So the next scheme is South Huddersfield in Kirklees. This scheme presents the opportunity to redevelop a brownfield site just south of Huddersfield Town Centre. It is a scheme to be developed by a registered housing provider experienced in the development of affordable housing in West Yorkshire. Scheme will aim to deliver 79 energy efficient affordable homes across a range of tenures, including affordable rent and shared ownership, for a range of tenant groups, including supported housing for those with special needs, elderly residents and general housing needs as well. Expected to be a number of 2 to 3 bedroom houses as well as 1 to 2 bedroom flats. The scheme is aiming to be zero carbon ready, built to high building and space standards, and the applicant intends to install renewable technologies enabling benefits to benefit from lower energy bills and resident health and wellbeing benefits as well. Today we are not seeking any funding recommendation. The indicative total value of the scheme is around 15 million to be determined at full business case, with a total indicative value of combined authority funding of it in the region of £869,000.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because it was being proposed by the council itself, and I just wondered whether the council, in terms of funding for these sorts of things, whether they were doing any kind of nominations agreements or long-term leases or something that would again enable institutional funding, which, given the council's governance strength, would enable things to be delivered at I think a much lower cost. And if we were to start taking projects such as this that are run and backed by the council, it could take on a much more sort of infrastructure funding type approach. So it doesn't necessarily have to be commercially viable on day one. And the covenants that the council and the leases or the leases in place would enable institutional money to be channeled into some of these projects. It's just an area that I work in quite a lot, and it just struck me as a really good opportunity to again drive investment.
Just to clarify, this isn't a council scheme, it is a registered provider scheme, and if I recollect correctly, that they are purchasing the site from a private sector owner. But it's a very interesting point that you make, nonetheless. Yes, the Cow Green certainly is a council site, but perhaps something that we can take back and reflect on, perhaps bring in a policy paper.
Just on this one, I was just noting the point about design and build, and this is obviously an implication for all of the projects that are being planned. And what we're finding is that contractors are building in the price increases into their design and build contracts, and they're not willing to take on the risk. And so what they're actually doing is charging a surcharge. Like taking a fixed rate mortgage, it's not expecting to go up, but you're going to pay a higher price today. So there's just something to bear in mind that may not be a solution, because they'll just build in that into it. And I think there are a lot of contractors who have not done that previously, have severe financial issues. So just something to bear in mind.
Being pedantic really, but the first scheme on Cow Green and the last one on Leeds Village are described as high quality. Are these not? we don't describe these energy efficient homes as high quality, but we do on the first one and the third one.
Yeah,
So,
I was
you
thinking
know,
say that this one is high quality as well. Okay.
Okay, are we happy with the good living? Now we go on to Leeds.
Leeds Village then, opportunity to develop a build-to-rent scheme on a brownfield site just on the rim of Leeds city centre, a site which has been vacant for several years within the 1% most deprived neighbourhoods in England. The scheme proposes in this first phase to create 697 high quality and energy efficient build-to-rent homes, including in the region of 124 affordable homes, which is subject to planning again. The development will install renewable technologies, including a micro combined heat and power plant and mechanical ventilation heat recovery to minimise carbon emissions. It will also, the overall scheme will include a level of commercial and community space, and it's expected to be a level of direct and indirect job creation from the proposed office accommodation plans. In terms of today's approval, again, no funding recommendation sought as its outline business case. The total value of the scheme is not inconsiderable, 154 million, with a contribution at this stage of 7,667,000 from the combined authority.
Thank you. Yeah, just a question really about the difference here in BCR. Presumably that's driven by land value and job creation as compared to the other schemes.
It is, yes. We are finding, particularly in Leeds, being the centre of the region, it's far easier to achieve the BCR. We're really struggling in some of the outer districts, particularly in Bradford and Calderdale. That said, we've got a proposal which is going forward with one of our schemes to the officer programme appraisal team, I think next week possibly, or the week after, looking to find an innovative way to address this so that we can bring more schemes forward outside of Leeds.
Absolutely. So it strikes me that the change to Green Book that sort of places more focus on strategic cases really important here, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that we've raised constantly with the Department of Levelling Up. We have asked them to consider whether we can apply this BCR achieving one, which is government criteria, it's not our criteria, whether we could apply that across the programme so that some of these lead schemes could help boost some of the other regional schemes which are struggling to achieve the BCR, but at the moment they have not been willing to consider that.
Thank you.
Just one point for me. Just obviously this is a significant length of build as well in terms of the length of time it's going to take to build them and the sheer volume that it will take. Just going back to the point about the environmental side of it, there's two things that drive it. There's one, the cost of living once the house is complete, and then there is the impact of modern methods of construction to reduce the impact of as it is being built. And I just wondered, again, it's more of an observation, but in order to get to where we need to be from climate perspective, with schemes of this size going on for a long period of time, is there any effort, any work done in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of construction as well as of operational cost when complete? Because I think sometimes with these, as we've seen in other areas, is that I know we're in a point where lots of things are in train. We have to get to a target, and it's at what point do we put a line in the sand and say, actually, we know this is going to be too big and continue, so we need to put more focus on this to say, how are we going to deliver on those ambitions?
Just to respond to that, Chair, each of these schemes will be obliged to complete a carbon impact assessment in compliance with the Combined Authority's carbon toolkits. So that will form part of the development of the full business case and will be reviewed and assessed as part of that. So it will form part of that decision making as we head towards full business case. But at this stage we don't have that level of detailed information, but it will be coming.
Just to reiterate, I suppose the comments I made earlier, I suppose apply across all of these. I was talking generally, but I did notice on this one particularly there's reference to asbestos in the land, and again, that to me that sort of sends alarm bells ringing about, well, what's the value that's been applied to the land, you know, in terms of that overall approach, in terms of the appraisal. And then there was also, I picked up something about the Network Rail Agreement as well. So again, risk and just understanding what is the nature of that agreement and what is the cost impact that is or impacted into the numbers. You know, it's sort of that kind of next level of detail, which I'm sure will come out at the next stage.
So certainly the risks are requested as part of the outline business case and the full business case, and some of them, such as the Network Rail agreements or land purchases, these kind of things, are a level of conditions which the PAT will put on to be complied with by the time we get to full business case or ATP. So yes, very, very good point.
Anybody else? Okay. Are we happy to move to the next stage with this scheme? Okay, thanks very much, Kate. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much for your attendance, and let's hope we get more attendance on the next one. But thank you all for coming and for your contributions. I think it's been really worthwhile hearing the different views. Thank you.